Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Welcome, fellow voyagers. Welcome to the good ship Tech Talk. She's a sturdy vessel and taken many a bold journey into the restless unknowns of the future. She's a good ship, this Tech Talk podcast. A tidy ship, reliable to the core. For she is steered by none other than Captain Matthew Dickerson. Welcome to the bridge, Captain.
So when is Talk Like a Pirate Day?
Yeah, no, I don't know, but I just felt I needed to then. I was like, I got carried away with the intro and yeah, why not?
Well, I'm sorry I didn't have a pirate response for you. My apologies. Now, this week I attended a charity event. I was involved in a particular charity, and when we had a draw, there was a car draw. So there's car raffles, and I remember 25 years ago, I first joined Rotary, and because you're the young junior member, they said, right, you sit down in the corner on Saturday morning and you get to sell raffle tickets. This is the initiation process. And I remember sitting there selling raffle tickets and filling in names and phone numbers on little stubs and handing the person the little stub. Don't lose it, but of course we had their name there, and it was a long, laborious process. And then, of course, the draw comes and you pull those stubs in a barrel and you get someone that's supposedly not bought a ticket and someone independent to put their hand in and pull out a name. A lot of pressure on that person of all these tickets in the barrel. Sure, you put out my name, why didn't you pull out someone else's name? So it's now, and I love this about technology, so much specialisation. We decided we wanted to do a car raffle for this event that we're running. And so now, rather than that old-fashioned process and how clumsy is that and trying to be physically somewhere to sell tickets, of course, it's all online, but we found a specialty site that sells, or that basically you set up to sell raffle tickets in something major. And I don't think they specialise in cars, but they certainly do a lot of cars in their raffles. So it made it very easy. We just pulled our details in, set up at the back end, made sure it was a legitimate company, that we weren't going to be siphoning money to somewhere overseas or something. And we went through that process, and then that was it. We could start selling tickets. Very easy. We had a QR code. We could put that on various Facebook
Of course, the
sites.
QR code.
The QR code. Now people know what to do with the QR code.
Yeah.
And we could sell tickets and all the rest of it. And then we got to the stage, and so that worked really well. So we sold tickets easily. We could sell them far and wide. It got to the stage of doing the draw. And I remember sitting there going, well, how does the draw work? We're not going to print out probably 1,500, 2,000 tickets we sold. We're not going to print out all those stubs of paper and have someone put their hand in. No, it's all automated on the process. You simply click in here and click that. Oh, don't click that because it would actually do the draw. So make sure we have it all ready, and we had a public event to make sure it was all legitimate and above board, and you click do the draw. Now, we couldn't see what it was going to do when we clicked the draw, because that would do the draw. So we're all sitting around going, I wonder what happens when we click this button. I was hoping that it would do something.
So you couldn't have a dry run and have someone win the thing and then go, oh, we'll do it again anyway.
Especially considering the first thing it did was send that person a message to say congratulations.
Of course, yeah.
So if we did that, sorry, we're just joking, James. You didn't really win.
It was a test. It was a dry run.
It wasn't my mate that won, so we're going to do it again, okay?
Oh, dear.
So we went through it. We didn't really know what it would look like, but I was hoping that it would be some type of virtual barrel draw, that maybe a barrel would spin on the screen. Maybe you'd see ticket numbers or names of people. So it'd be, there's my name. I might be winning. Or it'd slow down a bit like a chocolate wheel. Yeah, when you're looking for your number to come up on a chocolate wheel. Yeah. And it's getting slower. It's tick, tick, tick. Is it going to go to the next one? Oh, no, it's not. I almost wanted all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the programmers who wrote this program were programmers. They weren't marketers.
They were looking for a means to an end.
That's right. So when we finally got to the stage, we went, okay, and we were filming, we were live streaming it out to Facebook, and we had a big group of people in a dinner there to say, someone might win this. We went click, and it was there, the winner. That was it, done.
There was no name on a screen.
No fair. Well, it was worse than that.
Oh!
Because when you entered the draw, when you put your details in, you could tick the box that says, please don't disclose my name if I win. So we went, okay, and the winner is name withheld. Ticket number 1, 2, 3, 4.
So
name
what's
withheld.
The definition of anticlimax?
Oh, that was it. We're all sitting around, and then we obviously had the details for name withheld behind the scenes. So we rang her behind the scenes, literally to go and say, well, do you mind if we disclose to at least the group of people sitting in the room who the winner is? And of course, when we rang her, it went straight to message bank.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't until the next day that we actually have a conversation. Oh, no, I just ticked that box. No, release my name. That's okay. So we then released her name, so that was fine. So I love the idea that there's such specialisation in technology,
Yep.
but you sometimes need, I think, just someone that comes from the marketing or from the...
We need some showbiz.
Maybe that's what we need. We need someone from the showbiz area to help the programmers out because they all work fine. Technology-wise work fine, but it just didn't quite have the razzle-dazzle at the end of it all. I actually would have liked to even have maybe 10... You almost won a prize. Here's a hat or something prizes.
Yeah.
And maybe you could set that up. But it was like there's one out of all these people entered. Maybe we should tease some people. Oh, you went close. You were almost there.
If you see, if it runs through a wheel and you see a whole bunch of names going past and you say, there's my name. Oh, well, obviously I'm not going to get it now.
Yeah, well, that's true.
But you still go, oh, but my name got up on the screen.
I was close. I was one off. Or my ticket number was one off. It's pretty irrelevant. But if you've got a ticket number, you're doing a draw. Y33 came out. I had Y34. I was so close. Yeah. Well, no, you were just about the same distance as everyone else that was in that draw. But it's a bit like lotto. You go and put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Same chance of winning as your birthdays, your random numbers,
Except
your favourite numbers.
It just doesn't feel right, Matt.
It doesn't feel right. But I'm waiting. And maybe in the next million years there'll be some lotto draw that comes out that is, see, look, what James and Matt said, it's correct, but it didn't feel right. Right. Anyway, that was the highlight of my week from a technology perspective.
Very, very good. All right, well, today we have some good news on the scamming front with a big story about how the bad guys have taken another boot to the groin. It seems like the good guys are getting better at doing their anti-scamming thing, folks. Now, we've got another good story for the speed freaks. It's in the US, and the US is heading towards high-speed rail. And for those who love the great outdoors and soaking up the rays, you can get more energy efficient too. Just get kitted out with a solar suit. But let's start with a story for the parents of toddlers. Button batteries. They were a revolution when they hit the market way back in the 50s. Their super long life and tiny size meant that a digital clock could be slotted in the tiny little end of your pen, and you got out of every time-telling writing conundrum that could be suggested. But as anyone with experience rushing a curious toddler to the hospital will testify, you should not put button cells in your mouth, folks. Button cells can cause chemical burns to your innards that can kill you. So, Matthew, 70 years later, we finally have a solution to protect our littlies from swallowing nasty button cell batteries.
We do have a good solution. And before I get on to that solution, the question I sometimes ask myself is...
Why did they put a clock in the end of a pen?
Well, that's another good question too. And apart from that question, the question I was asking myself before you brought that up was, what is technology? And so when I do research for these stories we do, sometimes I see something that I find fascinating, that's interesting, and then I go, well, is it technology? And the solution I'm going to talk about today was one of those that I thought, I love this story, but is it really technology? And so some people think about technology being electronics, and that kind of makes sense, or machinery. But I, very loosely and very deliberately loosely, so I can bring in lots of things, I say that technology is application of knowledge for practical purposes. How's that sound for a definition?
I think that's exactly it.
Good. That means we can talk about anything.
That's
anything
exactly what I would have said, yeah. Although if you want to start talking about stone axes and stuff, we've probably gone past that, haven't we?
Well, we have, but again, we go back to the Alderman toolkit, for example, the stone flakes in that. At that particular point in time, they go, oh, you see those blokes over there? They got some flash little stone flakes they use. Yeah. How flash are they when they're cutting up some meat? So that would have been technology in the day. So I would say maybe not so much now, but back in the day when that was created. And of course, things move on. We discover better things and we go forward. So there's a whole range of things about this that's quite fascinating and interesting, which I want to talk about. So under that definition of application of knowledge for practical purposes, I'm going to say this is technology we're going to talk about here.
For sure.
Now, it's come about because of a sad story. And this is what sometimes the motivation for things, sometimes people get motivated by, they've got an idea, they want to get it out to the world, or they want to make some money, or it's just too good an idea. This one, unfortunately, as sometimes happens, was driven by a tragedy. There was a young child named Reese who died, unfortunately, Reese Hamsmith, who died, and she swallowed a button battery at the age of 17 months. And exactly as you said, there are a whole range of things that can happen. She didn't actually die immediately. She died after some time in hospital, but essentially back in December 2020, she died as a result of swallowing a button battery. Her parents said, I don't want this death, as you can imagine, as heartbroken as they were, this death to come to no good. So they created a not-for-profit called Reese's Purpose. So in other words, the purpose that Reese was on this earth, even though she died so young, is to help other people. So they started working out ways to reduce the risk of button batteries for other children around the world. And when you consider that at the moment in the US alone, about 8,000 minors are admitted to emergency departments as a direct result of swallowing batteries, then it's a bigger problem than I realised. I thought that wouldn't happen that often. Surely we know about the danger, so it wouldn't happen that often. But obviously it does happen. And that's no disrespect to those parents of those 8,000 children each year, because kids get into everything.
That's right. Accidents happen.
Accidents happen. I've got my son, who's now 22, has got a scar on his fingers because at one stage we don't have any heaters in our house because we've got slab heating, so you don't see any heat source. But we were visiting a friend who happened to have a radiator bar heater, and he was crawling along the ground at under the age of 1 and saw that to try and help himself stand up. And so he put his hand on this nice glowing red thing to hold himself up and started crying, obviously. And so we rushed to the hospital. And so, again, we were terrible parents because we weren't watching. Not really. Kids get into stuff. So in this case, they've worked with Energizer and they've said, what can we do to make these batteries safer? Now, when a child sees a battery sitting on the ground, or maybe it pops out of a toy, they pick that up and they put it in their mouth because kids tend to, young kids particularly.
Taste is a valid sensation and it's a way of learning things.
Exactly right. So they started first of all working on making sure the batteries weren't exposed. And in the US, they got a thing called Reese's Law through on the 16th of August 2022. And that talks about having child-resistant closures on battery compartments. So that makes it safer so kids don't just pop out a battery. And also about stricter warning labels and making it harder to get into batteries, which is that frustration we get when we buy batteries. I can't just get this open. I've got to get the scissors and cut it out. That's a good thing. But obviously batteries do end up sitting in lounge rooms, sitting in toys that maybe
that's right.
Kids use.
Once something that's been used for a while.
Exactly right. Now, so Energizer and Reese's Purpose got together and said there's two things. The first thing is when they pick it up and put it in their mouth, let's make it so it tastes so disgusting that the child says, that's not a lolly, I'm going to spit it out because it's got a bitter taste to it. So they've come up with a non-toxic coating that will last for the life of that battery on the outside, so the first thing they do is spit it out.
Well, I understand that's the same thing, same sort of thinking as the smell they put in natural gas.
Yeah, exactly
which
right.
is odourless.
Yes,
so we can smell it, we hate it, and so there's gas leak.
That's right. We smell a gas leak, not because natural gas has got an odour, because they put an odour into it so that you go, what's that I can smell? That must be that stuff they put in natural gas to make it smell. So you're right. So put that bitter taste on the outside. So I thought that was a brilliant idea. But the second part they did was even better. They've got, on that same non-toxic coating that they've got on there that tastes bitter, they've also got a dye that reacts with saliva. Probably reacts with moisture in general, but reacts specifically with saliva. So if you put it in your mouth, it turns blue. So you come in, you see your child with blue around their mouth, and the first thing you do is start looking on the ground to see if they spat out that bitter-tasting battery. If you can see the battery on the ground, you say, oh, thank goodness, the battery's on the ground. My child spat it out. I know they had it in their mouth because it's all blue, so I can take that battery and put it away and thank goodness, thank you for Reese's Purpose. If you can't see the battery sitting on the ground or nearby, you pick up the child and you get to hospital.
As soon as possible.
Exactly right. Now, many people think that choking is the main hazard, but choking isn't the main hazard. It's the chemicals that are inside that battery, and when they get inside your stomach, you've got a various number of chemicals and acids. Well,
it can even burn your esophagus.
Well, that's the main
in your
risk.
Esophagus.
Correct. That's the main risk. So
before it gets to the stomach.
So it can burn through tissues and organs, but the esophagus is the main area. So even if it gets stuck in your throat, in your esophagus, and it gets stuck there and you can still breathe, so you're not choking, but it can get stuck there to the point where it then burns your esophagus, and then you've got a hole in your esophagus out to the rest of your body, which obviously doesn't sound like a good outcome for someone. So that's I think the breakthrough here. And those batteries, not often things we talk about here are things that are coming in the future, distant future, maybe near future, but this is one that's available now. I'm not sure if they're available in Australia yet, but in the US, you can go and buy Energizer batteries.
Can't imagine it'll be very long.
No, I imagine that it would just be standard fare. It's not like you're going to say, here's the one with the blue dye and here's the one without. Pick which one you want. Yeah. It's going to be on every battery. And I imagine that other battery companies as well, whether Reese's Purpose says have the technology because we want to share it with everyone, a bit like Volvo did with seatbelts. It's too important a discovery to hold it for one brand, or whether other brands developing something similar. The other quick one is just a little PSA here. If you do have a child that swallows a battery and they're over the age of 12, the advice from the medical experts is to, on the way to the hospital, give them honey. The honey apparently attaches to the battery and reduces the likelihood that chemical burns will actually affect the body.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So if you've discovered something there, pick them up on the way out the door, grab the tub full of honey and a spoon and say, on the way to the hospital, have some of this while we're going along in the car. Under the age of 12 months, don't give them honey, apparently. I'm not sure why, but that was the advice of the medical experts when I was doing this research.
12-month-old. Yeah.
12-month-old and plus, yeah. So anyway, well done from a family tragedy, coming up with something like that. And I just think that's absolutely brilliant, the concept of it and the application of that concept as well.
One thing we love on Tech Talk is 3D printing. And if you don't love 3D printing like we do, well, maybe you're just not our people. Or perhaps we can change your mind when you hear about the world's largest 3D printer. Matt, we're 3D printing houses now. This is a big step.
Well, it's a self-proclaimed largest, and I do worry when someone says, we've got the largest, whatever. Well, have you got extensive research to prove that? Well, not really. And the reason they're calling it the largest is because it's the University of Maine, and they had a printer that they called Master Print, which they claimed was the largest 3D printer in the world. And they've got a new one, and it's now bigger than Master Print. So they're now saying, well, obviously this is the biggest in the world because it beats our last one. I'm got no data to suggest it isn't the largest.
There needs to be a register of large 3D printers.
Well, Guinness World Records would say that's the official register, isn't it?
Okay.
So they've got the new 3D printer and they're calling it Factory of the Future 1.0. They didn't really go Master Print 2, which might have been the obvious thing to go for, but this is a whole new design, obviously. So Factory of the Future, FOF 1.0. I'm not sure
Remember
if FOF
that,
sounds
folks?
great.
Yep.
Yeah, FOF.
When you're in conversation with people, when they're talking about the FOF.
Just slip that into casual conversation. It can create structures measuring 29.3 metres long by 9.8 metres wide by 5.5 metres high. So that's a reasonable sized building.
Size.
The exciting part about this, though, is it doesn't use concrete, and I've seen 3D printers in action in the flesh using concrete. It comes out like a toothpaste out of a tube almost, and they use concrete to do it. This is using bio-based thermoplastic polymers, so plastic basically. So they're printing with plastic, but friendly plastic, not plastic that's bad for the environment. And again, the whole idea here is to try and reduce the amount of carbon emissions from things like cement that we know a lot of carbon emissions, steel, a lot of carbon emissions from that.
Yeah.
So a normal house might be steel, might be cement. So try and reduce that because across the world, construction activities contribute approximately 37% of all greenhouse gases.
Wow.
So if we can reduce that somewhat, then that's a good thing, obviously. They're talking about building houses. Already with Masterprint, they built houses just as some demo houses, and they're building small sustainable homes. So, for example, 56 square metre home, not that big, say roughly 11 by 5 metres. So not a huge home, but again, the idea here is to take these and where you've got housing shortage, where you've got underprivileged areas where you don't have housing, where you've got people living in basic structures that aren't really called houses, maybe that's a good idea. Or maybe in a disaster zone where you've had a tsunami hit, for example, you need some housing just to keep people away from the elements in a short period of time, then get a 3D printer in there. They're talking about with this new one, again, obviously you can do bigger, you can do small houses. The time frame to print from the time they say go to the time they're finished is about 80 hours. And that's for a normal sort of modest single-story basic home.
Over 3 days.
Yeah.
And these things will run 24/7, won't they?
They will. And I did actually see one that was printing at one stage, a concrete one, and they were only printing during the daylight hours, and it was during a winter period. And the only reason they said they were doing that is because they hadn't got their mixture, the secret formula right for different temperatures. So they were keeping it in daylight hours because that's where it was set up to run. But logically, with thermoplastics, there's no reason you couldn't print 24 hours a day. And if you didn't have it quite right for different temperatures, presumably you could modify that and get those different temperatures. So it does sound quite fascinating. It's a bit different to other large 3D printers we've seen, but it's very similar to small 3D printers that people have sitting on their desk because they're using plastics. They're using probably not biodegradable plastics, but they're using plastics in those structures when people print their little knickknacks for their desk or they print little Lego pieces, whatever they might print with a desktop 3D printer. It's really taking that same concept, blowing it up completely. 227 kilograms of the polymers can be printed per hour. So it's a reasonable flow rate. And again, that's where you get that 80 hours from when you're printing a whole house. So it does sound quite fascinating. They're planning on the number they want to focus on, 80,000 new homes in Maine over the next 6 years. So they're talking about pumping these out, and that's just from one organisation, one university that's come up with this 3D printer. There's obviously people working on 3D printers around the world. So it's a fascinating world. I think maybe another 20, 30, maybe 50 years' time, people will look back and say, what? You put one brick at a time around the outside of the house and then some mortar in between.
Who would have
Really?
done that?
That's right. What a crazy concept that is. So this sort of thing where we'll just roll out a printer, and again, I've talked about it before, the architects love this because they can draw designs that now can be produced easily, cheaply, with no extra work compared to a normal builder using bricks or concrete or timber. You want to build
There's
those
a whole new level
curves.
of physics in there, yeah.
Well, that's right. So anyway, looks like fun. I can hardly wait to see more and more of these houses rolling out with this methodology.
ECGs, or electrocardiograms, are medical diagnostic tools that have, without a doubt, saved countless lives. Providing a visual graphic of the heart's electrical rhythm, a trained eye can spot anomalies that may be life-threatening and offer advice and medication to prolong a life that might otherwise have been cut short. Matt, I say a trained eye, but apparently we've trained AI now, and it's pretty good at keeping people alive, I'm pleased to say.
Well, you do say a trained eye, and that's interesting because you're right. There would be experts who have looked at ECGs and they can take some information and they can make some predictions about what's going to happen, but we've got limitations. Humans have got limitations, and storing and analysing huge amounts of data is not our forte. But if you add AI into the mix and you feed data, and I'm talking about a lot of data here, so they fed from 2 hospitals they did this trial in, 16,000 patients, 450,000 ECGs. From all of that data, AI said, well, you know what? I can see when this pattern is happening here, there's a high risk that this person is going to die based on all this data I've got and the people that did die when the ECGs looked like this in particular. So based on all of that, they can say, I'm going to give you alerts when we've got ECGs of people that we know, based on all this other data, are in a high risk of death category. Wow. So far, they've got basically the ability to reduce deaths by 90%. So we're talking about deaths from the particular heart disease, not from something else. So they're in hospital, they've hooked up, they're doing regular ECGs, and they say, this person here, high risk. So either more medication or monitor them. They're about to have a cardiac arrest, they're about to have some severe problems with their heart. Monitor them so you can take action pretty quickly. So again, it's that whole thing. If you're sitting beside the bed as the doctor and the person has a heart attack, you've got a pretty good chance of saving them rather than, doctor, come to room 17, code blue, or whatever the code is. I don't know what it is, but essentially you've got that ability to be there when it happens or to use the right medication to reduce that. They've implemented it so far in 14 military hospitals in Taiwan, so they're starting with that. And the information so far is saying that this is a very reliable methodology. 39 doctors were involved in that first trial, and they were convinced that this is a way that we can monitor people and have a very good predictor as to when something might happen that would normally kill them or they would normally die from. But we can actually now intervene and address that. So this is a good one for the AI. We hear some bad stories about AI.
Yeah, some worrying stuff. But perhaps this one is going to be able to defend us from the end of days.
Maybe that'll help us. So thank you, AI overlords.
Now, are you one to cop out on a password? I mean, when pressed for a password, are you a 123 ABC kind of person? Well, if you are, then you have plenty of company, but not so much anymore if you live in the UK. Throughout the United Kingdom, they're cracking down on cyber slackers who couldn't be bothered protecting themselves with a decent password. Matt, I guess the cost of cleaning up the mess probably warrants some strict parenting for some toddler-type thinking on the internet.
And it has to come to the government to go and do that for people. I did more research before this story on common passwords, and once a year there will normally be someone that releases all the common passwords, and we normally do a story on it, but this one I did a bit of a bonus one, and still, even today, after all the cyber attacks, after all the information, after all those people listening to Tech Talk, still in the top 10 used passwords across the world, 6 of those are made up of just a sequence of numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is one of the top 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is one of the top 10, all the way through to 1, 2, 3, 4, 0 at the end. So 6 of the top 10, and then the other ones are password, because who would ever guess the word password as a password?
It's just too obvious, man.
Oh, exactly. You wouldn't use that. QWERTY, obviously across the keyboard. ABC123, and number 10 in the list is 111111. Even with all of these different warnings, they still have that. And I sometimes see a person with their mobile phone sitting nearby and they haven't put their face in or their fingerprint and they just type in the password and you see them hit the number 1 6 times, and then when their phone's locked, I go over and say, I think I can crack your password, and I do some hocus pocus and I just type it in and I go, there you go. Oh, wow, how'd you do that? Well, actually, I just glanced over your shoulder while you put in that.
You're an idiot.
I try and refrain from quite going that harsh, but you're right. That's what I'm thinking, but I'm a bit nicer than
I
that.
think it stems from people thinking, oh, well, anyone wants my data, I'm not that interesting, and that's the biggest... That's the trap that the crims want.
Well, that's right. They rely on that, don't they? They rely
on your absent-minded attitude.
Well, even I'm not that important. I haven't got that much worth stealing. Well, your identity, that is worth stealing. So, yes.
Yep.
So that's a bit scary. And obviously the UK and the UK government says, well, we've got to protect people from themselves. Obviously they can't do it themselves. So they're introducing laws that will ban common and weak passwords for any device that connects to the internet.
Isn't that amazing?
They're
going to ban it.
They're going to ban it. So if I'm a manufacturer
Yep.
that has any product that goes into the UK that has the product that connects to the internet, I've got to enforce some type of strong password, some type of not common password, and there'll be minimum lengths and minimum requirements in terms of...
I will say that it was frustrating the other day when I had to... I just signed up at a new thing and I needed 16 characters.
Wow.
And it needed to have the non-numerical or alphabet characters. So I got they had to tie me in knots. Now I've got a couple there in my head that I swim around in my head there, and they're not obvious, so I had to invent some more.
That's right, because 16, that's pretty tough. And when you make it that tough, then sometimes people just start putting repetitions of what they've got.
1.
That's right. Hopefully, if they've got something that has 16 characters, they've got enough requirements that it's got to have. Typically, a password's got to have a special character, so a $sign, an @ sign, that type of thing, upper and lower case and a number. If you've got all those 4 and then you've got a reasonable length, that it makes it pretty hard just to do a brute force attack on it.
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine said, get a phrase in your head and attach that password to the phrase.
Well, I was going to talk about exactly that.
Right.
So when we were at school, we learnt the Order of the Planets by my very elderly mother just saw Uncle Ned pass. Now, that was still when Pluto was a planet, so the P at the end. Now, I was a bit naive when I was at school, and I thought that meant that she saw Uncle Ned pass by. And it was only when I got a bit older, I went, hold on, I think they mean that Uncle
really
Ned
dark.
just died. That's right. And then once Pluto was gone, I went, oh, good. My very elderly mother just saw Uncle Ned. That's nice. She just saw Uncle Ned. G'day, Uncle Ned. How you going? So that was the way you remembered the Order of the Planets. And so that was fine. And that's called a mnemonic. Yeah. And I recommend that type of thing. So whether you call it a phrase or a mnemonic. So, for example, if you're trying to come up with a password, you might say, Tech Talk is my favourite podcast. And then that would be TTIMFP. So that's not enough characters for a start, but you'd chuck a couple of upper and lower case. So Tech Talk, you might put as uppercase TT and then lowercase IMF and then P. And then you might go, well, what's something I'm going to remember about podcast? Oh, I know. The first podcast was released in 2003. So then I might put another character. So you might put TTIMFP/03. And so there's one that's got a reasonable length of characters. And it's pretty easy to remember because most people would say Tech Talk is my favourite podcast. So it's easy to remember. Don't use that one, folks, now, because that might be used by lots of people.
It's out.
It's out, that's right. So create something like that, a phrase, a mnemonic.
That's got some meaning to you.
Exactly right. And then pick the first character of each of those. Pick the first couple if you want, but something that you can remember in that moment of, what's my password? What do I use again? Yeah. And I've said it before, in all your different passwords that you use, you might use the same password for many things, but the one that you want to have one that's completely different using everywhere else is your email, because if someone gets your password and starts trying to get into sites, sometimes they'll want to be able to send an email to confirm your identity. And if there's a different password for the email, it just makes it that bit harder for them to get into that extra one. So back to the UK, sorry, off topic there a little bit slightly, but back to the UK, they're going to basically say to all those manufacturers, we're going to make you, in terms of what you do with your customers, have the stronger password. You buy the product, it'll have a standard password. It'll make you change the password. The first time you use it, you have to change the password. Now, you see ones that come up and they say, you should change your password. We recommend you change your password, but they don't make you change the password. So that's a good move. Then when you start to think about it, that means your TV connects to the internet, so you're going to have a strong password on your TV. Yeah. That means your doorbell is going to have to have it on there.
We've got passwords for everything these days.
We do.
And it is exhausting.
And your car. Our car's connected to the internet, so you're going to have a strong password on your car. So anything that you do is good. So I can see people being frustrated, but with all of the cyber attacks we've been having, it actually makes sense. The other thing that I thought was interesting is that they did some research on home networks, homes basically through the UK. The average home network has 9 devices that are connected to the internet. So you can imagine how easy it is for hackers. That's average, that's right. How easy it is for hackers when they've got all these different devices, all these different ways. Half of the homes in the UK have got some type of a voice assistant like Alexa. And I guarantee most of those would have a fairly easy password on them. So it is important. And again, for us in Australia, it's not mandated, but I would say to everyone, make sure you've got some strong passwords, make sure you've got something. And then don't stick it on a Post-it note on your computer screen so you don't forget it, because someone breaks in and they go, thank you very much, there's the password. So it can be physical break-ins, it can be virtual break-ins, but it's making it easier and easier if you don't use strong passwords for novice cyber attackers to say, I'm going to make some money in a pretty simple way.
100%. High-speed rail has us all agog here at Tech Talk. Last week we brought you news from China, and our friends in the US hate to be outdone. Matt, it seems that the rail race is on. Could we be about to enter another golden age of rail?
Well, hopefully, and I hope that with all this rail advancement that's happening, there'll be some second-hand fast trains that they can send to Australia, because it is frustrating that we don't have anything that even resembles fast trains in Australia. But in this one in the US, and I'm surprised actually they haven't done a bit more in the US. Obviously, there's the great battle when they put the railway in across the nation to join the nation or bring the nation together, but they haven't really done a lot compared to, say, China and Japan, who seem to be very advanced in fast trains, even France. So you would have thought when French people started doing it that the UK people would have said, hold on, we can't have the Frenchies beating us. So
if there's anyone that we can't allow beat them,
it'd be the French, wouldn't it? That's right. So they've decided that between Vegas and Los Angeles is a common route, which it is. So let's put in a fast train there. There's a train journey there you can do now, which takes about 4 hours or so. It's about 350 kilometres between those two, so that seems about right. But they're investing $12 billion on a high-speed rail link between Vegas and Los Angeles. Should be done by the end of this decade, so that's not too bad, 6 years to get that done. And the speeds they're aiming at, though, I was a bit surprised about this, they're only talking around 300 kilometres an hour. Now, we know that Shinkansen in Japan does about 320. We know in China, the standard trains there, or not standard, but they've got their fastest train now, 429 kilometres an hour. We talked about it last week in going past that with some extra maglev, 4,000 kilometres an hour eventually.
So what we're saying is, come on, guys.
Come on, US, have a crack, and then come on, Australia. We've talked about it before, Melbourne to Sydney. What an obvious route to have fast train travel on, but we just don't seem to have done it.
It's a bit of a tectonically active area, though, so the ground moves a bit.
Between Vegas and LA?
Well, along that western seaboard, that's the San Andreas Fault region.
That's interesting because they don't seem to have mentioned that as a potential issue.
Yeah, right,
and if you're going to pick two sites to go between, you'd probably pick somewhere.
I was only going to say that you only need to have a little bit of ground movement and have that rail lift just a little bit. When you're travelling at 300 kilometres an hour in a straight line, you keep travelling at 300 kilometres in a straight line. And if there's a lift, then that train's going to do a jump. Yeah,
so that's interesting. And presumably they thought about that.
Yeah.
And maybe they've gone to somewhere.
We haven't got monkeys who are making this.
Well, we hope not anyway.
Hope not.
and that's a good point, though. You look at Melbourne and Sydney, there's not really a tectonically active area there, so you could have a fairly stable route there.
For sure.
Yeah. So anyway, 400,000 tonnes of carbon they will save annually by doing this. 35,000 new jobs. I don't know how they come up with that. That's quite impressive. Whether that means more people can go and gamble, so there's more people being able to go to Vegas, I'm not sure, but it sounds quite interesting. But the other thing I love about train travel compared to air travel, we've talked about it before, you can walk up and just get straight on a couple of minutes before it flies. It's not the same process. But when you get on board, and my brother does a bit of train travel, he lives in Boston, and a bit of train travel down to Washington, and he said the thing that he likes about it is you can walk on the train, sit down, open his computer and start working straight away, and he's got Wi-Fi coverage the whole way. Of course, on a plane, put that computer away, sir. You've got to wait till you get up to a certain level, then you can connect to the onboard Wi-Fi if it's got that. You just jump on and go. So it's actually probably a more comfortable scenario to get on, start working. You can keep working the whole way, and then you kind of get out the other end in the middle of the city. So whole range of advantages. I just hope as we get this technology developing more around the world that finally someone in Australia says, if they can do it everywhere else in the world, surely here in Australia we could do it a little bit maybe, because I just think it would open up so much.
For sure. Listeners in Australia might have heard that our federal police have been busy smashing scamming syndicates within our shores in recent weeks. Well, apparently there have been some big successes on an international scale as our defenders in the field of cybercrime start to catch up with the big-time scammers and their ilk. In a massive international effort, a major phishing platform, I'd like to call that a cyber jetty, a major phishing platform has been dismantled, and we can chalk up a big one for the good guys, Matt.
Did you have to think about that for long? Was that one that just came to you?
Straight? No, I just thought of it just then. Yeah, phishing platforms. Anyway. Moving on.
It's fascinating how little some cyber criminals know about technology. We had this image, or I at least had this image, of either some person sitting in their basement in a darkened room hacking away, or some big industry where you've got this very advanced technology company that's got a bunch of people there that are very clever, all doing this hacking. But this says to me that they're selling phishing kits to cyber criminals. So I get up this morning, my break and enters aren't going so well. My car rebirthing is taking a bit of a dive lately. How much do some cyber criminal work? So you reach out to this company. It's called LabHost. You reach out and you say, I need a phishing kit. And they don't send you a rod and tackle. They don't send you some hooks. They send you a cyber criminal phishing kit. Now, at this stage, when they basically have broken into this ring, they found $1.17 million worth of sales of phishing kits, but I suspect there's much more than that. Mm-hmm. And they've got a good subscription model, James. You don't have to fork out a lot of money to get started in this game. $249 a month is the average that LabHost charge if you want to be a cyber criminal. So not a lot of money. Ridiculous. Now, what do you get for that? Well, they'll create for you or give you the tools. You create it. They'll give you the tools to create a fake website, fake domains, fake email addresses, basically give you the tools that a hacker would need to go and try and break in and start to seduce people or work with people to get their information.
Scamming made easy.
Scamming made easy, that's exactly right, which is pretty sad, but I'm quite impressed that this law enforcement across 19 countries got together to say, let's break in and stop this ring. Now, I'm sure there are other ones out there, and I'm sure there are other people that aren't very good at what they do, but they're taking advantage of these tools. And maybe the people who ran LabHost are pretty dirty on someone now because they maybe sold their kit to some real amateur who suddenly exposed what was happening there, and then they've been able to break down the ring. But how much will this change? How much will this have an impact on all the cyber criminal activity out there? You'd hope a little bit. They found that users of LabHost had collected 480,000 bank card, as in MasterCard, Visa card numbers. They had 64,000 pins associated with these different cards. They had 1 million website and online service passwords were stolen with LabHost tools. So they were pretty serious about it. 40,000 phishing domains, 10,000 users they had globally from these LabHost customers. So again, a lot of people out there were doing it, and a lot of those people wouldn't actually know much what they're doing about it. I actually watched a Netflix show the other day called Bitconned, and it was quite an interesting show. I recommend our listeners watch it if they've got nothing better to do on a Sunday afternoon. But it was about some people who basically created this concept of something to do with Bitcoin, with cryptocurrency, where you just had a card that you go and make purchases using your cryptocurrency. They had no idea about cryptocurrency, no idea about the technology. They just went, wouldn't that be good? Yep, let's go and do that. So they just basically put some marketing stuff together, and everything they sold, all the money they raised was just on this idea with no knowledge.
Wow,
so,
crazy.
And I think that's
snake oil.
Snake oil, that's right. I think that's what's happening with a lot of these phishing users or cyber criminals. They don't actually know about the technology. There's not even, we sometimes talk about it saying, oh, they're really clever how they did this. They're not even clever. They just go and sign up to a subscription service and say, give me the tools. So well done to the authorities on breaking this one down. Hopefully, there's a lot more of these that are going to be broken down, and hopefully people learn that maybe they just can't keep creating these because they're eventually going to get caught. Is it worth it? I mean, that one I watched on TV the other day, one of the guys ended up 8 years in jail. I don't care how much money you made out of your scam, 8 years in jail is not worth any amount of money from my perspective.
Absolutely. And the other really big takeaway that I take out of this is 19 countries got together and agreed on how the internet should be used.
Well, that's a really good thing, isn't it? So it was led by the UK Metro Police, but they had all the big guys involved, US Secret Service, FBI, we had our Australian Federal Police here. So again, you're right, getting 19 countries to agree that this is a bad thing, we should take it down, is a good thing.
The battle to overcome the energy crisis is on, and the solutions continue to be diverse and very, very clever. No surprises that solar voltaics are right on the front line, and one bunch of innovators are thinking that we might as well start wearing solar cells. Why not? Matt, it looks like the fashion world is about to see a shift from the catwalks in Milan to the sunny skies of Tokyo.
Well, you'd have to do the catwalks outside then, wouldn't you? You'd have to make sure that when you're on the catwalk, it's in an outdoor venue.
That was the visual I had. Yeah,
Exactly. So this is quite cool. Flexible, waterproof, organic photovoltaic film. Now, it's not going to generate as much electricity per square metre as solar
What's
panels.
the acronym on that one?
Or flexible and waterproof organic photovoltaic film. Yeah, it's not bad. Well, you could come up with something to use as a password, perhaps. Come up with a mnemonic for that. So essentially here, it's not going to produce the same amount of electricity per square metre, but you're trying to drive maybe some devices that you've got on you. So your phone in your pocket, for example, maybe some other type of wearable that you've got. Maybe you've got some medical devices.
Just have a battery that you're going to store up some power in and use it later.
To use later on, exactly right. But again, imagine being out bushwalking, not having to worry about having some sort of solar panels you roll out because the jacket you're wearing, things. And again, it comes down to surface area. You'd say put it on your hat, but there's not a lot of surface area on your hat. But putting on your jacket, for example, having the sun shine on your back, then what a fantastic concept. So they've been able to do this with something that they've done a lot of testing with to see that it's going to withstand being built into clothing. So, for example, they've put it underwater for 4 hours, pulled it out, worked fine. They then stretched it 300 times by 30%. So they took it, put it on a machine, stretch out 30%, come back, 30% come back. Even after that, it was still performing at 96% of its original performance.
Oh, there you go.
So, yes, exactly right. They put it through whatever a standard washing machine cycle is. They put it through that, pulled it out, kept being able to be used. So lots of good breakthroughs. The main way they've been able to do this is by making it ultra thin. And when I talk about ultra thin, the film itself is 3 micrometers. Now, if you think about the human hair, what's that, about 20, 30 micrometers?
I don't know off the top of my head, but this is skinny.
Excuse the pun.
This is a 3,000th of a millimetre.
Yeah,
so look at your millimetre ruler and cut that into 1,000, each millimetre into 1,000 bits.
Yeah, so that's how thin they've got it, and that obviously being that thin gives it some of the ability to be flexible and build into clothing without being a stiff thing stuck on the clothing. They haven't produced any clothing with it yet. Obviously, this is all still in the research phase, but being able to produce it, getting to that point where you can sew it into clothing, I think that seems like a pretty good way to go forward.
For sure. Given
the fact that we're going to have to work out other ways to generate our power and have other methods. So you go for your bushwalk, even just walking around the city, having generation of power as you walk is pretty cool.
Yeah. Pressure on telcos to deliver communication 24/7 without fault is absolutely enormous. Just ask the folks in charge at Optus, who have suffered a couple of glitches in the past 14 months or so. We've now become so reliant on uninterrupted communications that when service drops out on a broad scale, well, let's just say that listeners who are with Optus and have a tendency to become triggered, you may want to fast forward the next 5 minutes past this next story. Matt, last November, a fair whack of the Australian public went very quiet because of an Optus outage. What was the fallout looking like now?
Well, still not great. So a third of Aussies lost phone and internet services with a nationwide Optus outage. It went for 14 hours. Now, the part about that that's the scariest is, sure, I can't ring you and say, hey, what are you up to today, James? But I also can't ring 000 during that time frame. And that's where you had obviously potentially life-threatening situations. Not being able to talk to you, that's sad. Not being able to ring 000, then that can be obviously very bad for people involved. So the Communications Minister, Michelle Rowland, has basically stepped in and said, we're going to do a federal review of this because it's no longer acceptable. And I do remember speaking to a CEO of a telco a few years ago, and he said to me that it's fascinating now how reliant we are. He said we've had outages going back 20 years ago where the mobile network was down for a day across the nation, and people didn't really notice, or they went, "Oh, it's a bit annoying." He said you have an outage for an hour, half an hour now. He said it's a major, major drama, and the reputation of that telco is severely damaged. So there's a few things that the federal government is saying that we've got to do. First of all, overhaul the entire 000 service. Now, one thing that is good is many years ago they got the carriers to be able to allow cross-connection with towers to make 000 calls. So, for example, you might see you've got no reception on your phone at some point, but you'll see 000 or you'll see emergency call only, and that means that your carrier doesn't have reception right at the moment, but one of the other carriers does have reception. So that sounds pretty sensible. It doesn't matter who you are, what tower you are near, you can still make a 000 phone call. But it's no good if you're near an Optus tower example and you're with Optus. Optus is down, bad luck. So all those Optus towers are out. The other part that the federal government is talking about, so that's one thing that's in place already, but they're talking about making sure there is the ability to reroute calls to functional parts of the network. So when you have an outage, it might not be that every part of the network's down, but some parts are down. Rerouting calls. So, for example, you dig through a phone line in some area that's a major phone line. You don't want everything to basically be stopped. So that's part of the federal review. Show us, to the telcos, show us how your network is built to the point where you've got redundancy built in. You don't want to have just one line feeding certain areas. The other part is biannual tests. So twice a year, they're going to have to do a test as if to say, how is your emergency network working if you've got this failure, a random failure presumably. Show us how you're going to recover from that. Show us what happens in this particular scenario. So a whole range of things they're trying to do, but sometimes it just comes down to the fact that failures happen, whether they be man-made or equipment failures. You've got to be able to work out how to pinpoint those failures and how to address them, because I don't know that you can build enough redundancy that you're always going to have the network covered all the time.
Yeah, we've become so dependent that we've traded that off for resilience.
We
no longer have the same resilience as we used to have.
We want to roll things out quickly. We want to roll things out in the best possible price, but it's probably the networks probably aren't as resilient as they used to be once upon a time. So it's a scary concept, but at least someone, the federal government, is looking at this and will hold the telcos to account to make sure they've got things in place to try and address this. But I don't think it's going to solve the problem completely. I don't think it means that we're going to have all possibilities covered and you'll never have another outage.
Accidents will happen. Google's foray into AI tech, Gemini, has been in circulation for quite a while now. Matt, you've been checking it out. What do you reckon about Google Gemini?
Well, it's interesting. 3 versions, Ultra, Pro and Nano. The most powerful, capable one is called Ultra. And when you read some of the information on that, get ready for this one. The first thing it says is it's capable of complex tasks like solving physics homework.
What?
The last thing a science teacher wants to hear is about saying it's going to solve physics homework. Extracting, updating scientific data. So really getting in-depth information and being able to analyse that and give you some decent results. Gemini Pro excels in reasoning, handling complex information, supports up to 700,000 words or 30,000 lines of code. It's a fair project, 30,000 lines of code. That's right. And then Nano is basically the compact version, more designed for mobile devices. So basically something that would be a basic tool. The first thing I did, though, was I went to ChatGPT and said, ChatGPT, which should I use? Which is better, ChatGPT or Gemini?
And did it explode?
Well, I thought it might have given me a very biased answer, but it was actually quite good. It actually gave me an analysis of ChatGPT and what ChatGPT could do and what Gemini could do. It actually was a little bit confused about Gemini in that it thought Gemini was probably more suited to doing things like advertising and writing advertising script, which I don't really see Gemini is focused on that, but maybe that was the natural bias that was built into ChatGPT. Who knows? Nano is available on the Pixel 8 and the Samsung Galaxy S24, not available on Apple iOS at this stage, but presumably you imagine that they want to address that part of the market as well, or maybe they want to keep it for Android users only for a short time. But I imagine that you would want to have as much of the market as possible covered. So the good part about this is that we've got competition in the AI tools and the tools that you can use. So I'd encourage people to have a play with Gemini, go and have a look at it. You've got those different models, as I mentioned there, and different pricing for those different models. Have a play with it, compare it to ChatGPT. The bottom line is these things aren't going away.
No.
They're getting to the point where they're going to be more and more a part of everyday society. And so we either need to pretend they don't exist or learn how to work with them to our advantage. And that's the bottom line here.
Yeah, it's a conundrum, isn't it? And that's all we have for you today, folks. I can feel the closing credits are about to appear out of the floor. And we have seconds before we fade to black in this room. Thanks for another cracking Tech Talk, mate.
I've got to go and come up with some new phrases now because I can't use Tech Talk as my favourite podcast anymore because everyone knows about that. So I'm going to go and work on that next new phrase I'm going to work with. 1, 2, 3,
ABC or something. Try that. See how you go with that.
Okay.
Well, that's all we have for you today, folks. Thanks for tuning in once again to Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Remember, it's fresher Tech Talk, so you know it's good. I'm James Eddy, wishing you an even-tempered week. We look forward to catching you again in 1 week's time, which is enough to have updated your dodgy passwords, people. Until then, hooroo.